You're listening to the Parents of Hardworking Teens podcast, episode 97. The day back in 2010 that I realized there's more to academic success than just subject knowledge. Today I'm going to explain what I believe that gap is and what I picked up on that day that could help your teen catapult their performance, confidence, and success in their study. I'm Katie Jones, and with over 15 years in education as an award-winning high school teacher, international external examiner, and as a study coach, I've helped thousands of students skyrocket their results and confidence. And this podcast is where I share all my insights, tactics, and tips with you, the parent, so you can help your hardworking teen get happy, smart, and successful in their study, and have you both enjoy the journey along the way. This is the Parents of Hardworking Teens podcast. Hey VIPs, I hope you and your teens are doing fantastic. Before we get into the main part of this episode, I want to let you know about what I have in store for you for episode 100 of the podcast. This is episode 97, so we are not far away, and I have spent a lot of time thinking and brainstorming and researching all of the different things that I could do to make it a super special and extra valuable episode for you. And what I realized is I'm not actually the best person to figure that out. You are, the listener, the person I'm actually going to be making it for. So I'm going to try to create a special episode, but I'm going to do that by taking on board what you and your teens have found the most useful and impactful strategies or concepts, or just something that has made you maybe think about things in a different way. And I will create an episode that I hope, or I plan, will become an excellent resource in and of itself. And I don't know exactly what that is going to look like or sound like, really, I should say, but I can promise you it will be super valuable and hopefully a little bit of fun as well. So to make this happen, I need to ask you a favor. Would you please take 2 minutes? It could be while you're standing in line at the grocery store or waiting for your coffee. It could be while you're waiting at pickup for your teen after school or from a sports meet. Just 2 minutes to tell me what has been the most useful or interesting or impactful thing that your teen has learned or picked up from me along the way at any point. It could be from something from the podcast. It could be from one of my webinars. It could be from a Facebook Live that I've done, or even just from something in one of my emails. Or, of course, if your teen has actually been in any of my programs, been to one of my workshops, been through my coaching or training programs, then it could be something from those. But whatever it is, it might be something big, it might be something small but significant. I would love to hear what that is for you. What has been most significant for you? And you can send it through in whatever way is easiest for you. So it could be an email. That's support@rocksolidstudy.com, or you can just click reply to any of my emails that I have sent to you if you're in my email list, and that will come through to that inbox. Or you can send a DM to Rock Solid Study on the Facebook page or on Instagram. Or you could even leave your feedback as a review in whatever app you are listening to this from at the moment, and I will pick it up that way. But please do get it through to me by Monday, the 13th of May at the latest, because then I will be using all of the feedback to actually get to work and put together something that is going to be as valuable as possible to you and your teen for episode 100. And so I figured that I would use this episode to basically go first and share the moment that made the biggest difference to how I see education and assessment today, and have done now for many years, and how I work with students, and what I basically base all of my work in the world today on. And it was the moment I realized that subject knowledge is not the only thing that creates success for students when it comes to exams, essays, and assessment in particular. To the extent that, in my opinion, it only accounts for half of it. The subject knowledge only accounts for half of their success. The other half is the skill of being able to apply that knowledge in the way that the question or the task demands and in the way that the mark scheme or success criteria require. Now, if you're new to the podcast, I really recommend going back to episode 1 where I explain the study success formula, this whole concept, which is knowledge plus application equals success. Because I can tell you that it isn't just students who focus mainly on the knowledge part in order to try and achieve success. Teachers also do, because the syllabuses and curriculum documents do. And I did too for the first 4 years of my teaching. And I did so successfully. In that time, I became a head of department. I even had 1 year as a head of faculty. I won a UK National Teaching Award in that time. Partly, I will say, I think as much for my general enthusiasm. Like, I had a huge rainforest wall display in my classroom. I made my lessons super interactive and I would like to think interesting. I ran extra tutorials, after school clubs, all the things that you do as an energetic teacher who had found their vocation. That was me. But also because of the outcomes and results that I had a part in creating. My students got some of the top GCSE results, and we had double the number of students taking geography as an option by my second year of teaching. And when the school got Ofsted inspected, I got observed. Yes, it was stressful. And I got rated as excellent. And look, I don't share all of that to try and blow my own trumpet. I mean, I am really proud of everything, but really, I think that it's relevant to share in order to prove that up to that point, I was focused solely on the subject content and there were no issues with that per se. And that, like most people, I thought that academic success was all about knowing the subject content. And the more and the better you knew it, the better you were able to answer exam questions, write essays, complete assignments, and coursework, which is true to some extent. And it wasn't until the end of my 4th year of teaching when I did my first ever external exam marking for the GCSEs back in England that I realized there was more to it, that there was a whole other side to academics, to assessment, to exams, and how they are marked, and how successful students are in them, or less successful than they could be. And it wasn't like I suspected that was the case as such, but when I had decided to apply to be an external exam marker, I was, number one, I was looking at moving over to Australia by this point, so you could definitely use some extra money. But I can also honestly say, even more than that, more than the money, because let me tell you, it's not that big a pay, I really wanted to know more about how exams actually worked. It was really like this mysterious world behind the curtain. Because honestly, teachers don't see or hear much more than the students do when it comes to how exams and mark schemes are written, the marking operation that goes on after they're collected in and sent off, or anything else in that whole process that happens before the exam papers are handed out in the exam hall and then shipped off afterwards. So I was genuinely curious as a teacher who was invested in this stuff, and also as the student I had been many years before who, like I know so many of your teens are, had experienced studying really hard, getting great results, often in my coursework, but rarely getting the exam results that matched. I was a classic B+ grade student. I got all A's and B's in my GCSEs and my A-levels. I will say much more weighted towards the B's. But I was working all hours. I was slaving over textbooks till midnight sometimes just to get those results. And it was always the coursework that brought up those results. My exam results never quite matched. So I applied to be the external exam marker. I got accepted. And little did I know that the very first day of this new venture would eventually lead me to where I am now. Having founded Rock Solid Study and created the 10-week grade transformation program, because from the word go, I was hooked. I went to the marker training day, and back then it was just one day. It was at the exam board offices. We would all go along, sit at these round group tables in this kind of large office room and be given general mark scheme training in person. And then we would go through every single question and marking criteria one by one. And I will share with you what really hit me through that process and in that day that I think will be helpful for you and your teen to be aware of. First, it was the fact that the cutoffs between marks are very specific and can be pretty cutthroat. Now, as someone who likes black and white and hates vagueness, this was actually great for me. But what really struck me was how in those moments of seeing this and learning this and getting to grips with it and getting the training, how I knew this would end up panning out for students, including my students who had sat this paper just a few days before. It was clear that there were going to be students who would have written a great response about what was asked, but they would miss the mark, literally, because they didn't expand exactly to what they were being asked or what the question said. And let me repeat that, because the wording there, I have said that really specifically on purpose. They wrote about what was asked, but didn't respond exactly to what was asked. And I specifically remember seeing this in a particular extended response question that was at least in part about pollution. I can't remember the exact wording of it. I have actually gone back and looked to see if I can find this particular paper online, but it was back in 2010, and their papers just don't go back that far, unfortunately, online at least. But I would love to be able to go back and find it and see this again, because the actual memory of it has stuck so firmly in my brain. But it was something to do with the impacts of a development or a factory or something like that. And in order for an answer to be classed as detailed, not just the lower level of like relevant or appropriate. Again, I can't remember the exact wording, but I do know that if they wanted to get detailed, the student had to state the exact type of pollution that they were discussing. Now, I had scripts come in as I was marking. Script is the word we use for completed exam papers. I had answers that literally mentioned things like fish being killed. So it was obvious that they were talking about water pollution. But if they had simply written pollution and not water pollution within their response, they could not make it to that top level of marks. That level of detail and specificity was one of the cutoffs in that criteria. Even though, of course, it was obvious that they were talking about water pollution. They were writing about fish. It wasn't air pollution. It wasn't visual pollution. It was water pollution. But as markers, we aren't allowed to what is called read meaning into an answer. So that means we cannot take two and actually make the four. The student has to give us the four. We cannot take what they've written in one place or one sentence and make the link to something else for them. And this is an issue I also see happening a lot in answers that clearly know their stuff, but they're just not quite putting it across in the right way or with the amount of detail or the linkages that they need. And so they rely on the marker making the connection or bridging the gap in their points, which doesn't happen because we're not allowed to, which is why I so often coach students on being really obvious and explicit in their writing. Like, I know it's obvious when you say that the earthquake made buildings collapse and then you later talk about people having to move into temporary shelters. But you need to explicitly state that buildings collapse, therefore people lose their homes, or their homes are destroyed, and therefore they are made homeless, and therefore they have to move to temporary shelters. And I could actually say a lot about extended response explanations and levels of detail and linkages, but I will save that for another time. That is definitely a whole other episode in itself. But with that example, I know they think that it's obvious. They don't feel like they're leaving anything out. And in some ways, it, of course, is obvious, but they have to state it. The marker can only mark what is on the page and do so according to the mark scheme, which will be detailed, which will be specific, which will be explicit. So back to that pollution question. I spent the whole rest of my day in that marker training just itching to get back to school the next day, to be able to tell all of my students to make sure that anytime they ever write the word pollution ever again, that they precede it with what type of pollution they are talking about. Even if it's obvious, even if they're not in an exam, because side tip, so many of these tips and skills should be practiced outside of exams all of the time so that they just become second nature when your teen is in the exam and they're on edge, their brains are feeling frazzled or they're stressed and they're under time pressure. I want students to have as many of the elements of exam technique and as many of these skills as possible to be executed on autopilot. And there were, of course, unfortunately, loads of other examples of ways students lost marks in frustrating ways, in ways that I could tell they really knew it, they could have gotten that mark. But there were also brilliantly, although I have to say less frequently, places where they gained marks in really smart ways, just by managing to hit a criteria or really succinctly get a point across with minimal words, no fuss, straight to the point. And I say smart, but whether it was intentional or not was not always clear. But I do want your teen to be smart about this stuff and intentional about it. So from that point on, I was building in as much exam technique as possible into my teaching. I realized there was this gap in education, a big gap in the skills of applying the knowledge that I was teaching and the students were learning. And as time went on, as years went by, another continent went by in my teaching, I was continuing to see these issues and really just wanted to spend more and more of my time and energy helping students to build these skills, develop the awareness of how all of this works, how the whole world of exams work. And I was expanding this into essays and assignments and the everyday tasks in their classwork and homework, because once I'd seen it, I couldn't unsee it. And if anything, it was standing out to me more and more and more. And I am still seeing these issues happen so often for students. And so I tell you all of this so that you can hopefully consider, where is your teen not perhaps stating the obvious? Maybe that's in using subject terminology. Maybe it's making specific connections or linkages. And without realizing it, or requiring the marker to read in meaning or make connections for them. Or where are they writing a great answer about what the question is asking, but they're not responding to exactly what the question is asking? And where might they be missing out on marks that they could be getting if they perfected their exam technique, or even had just some elements of exam technique that they built into their study? Where could they be answering questions, tackling assignments and coursework, or writing essays, or completing exams in a smarter, more strategic way? Because this is so often where the biggest gains can actually be made. There's only small gains that can be made in learning more subject content, but big gains, big jumps through criteria and marks and grade boundaries can be made when they can master those things. And like I said, I would love to hear back from you. If you have gotten something of value from this podcast or from one of my webinars, a Facebook Live, my emails, my free resources, I would really appreciate your feedback. Email support@rocksolidstudy.com. Share your story with me of something significant or pivotal or just a little bit thought-provoking that you have learned or picked up along the way. And I will repay you with something super cool for episode 100. Like I said, at the moment, I don't know what it will be. It's going to depend on the feedback that I get, but I promise it will be worth way more than the 2 minutes it will take you to send me an email or send me a message. Take care, everyone. I will look forward to seeing you back here next week. Have a great week. I'll see you then. Bye. If you're ready to have your teen achieve their best possible results with less stress, then I want to invite you to enroll them in the 10-week Grade Transformation Program, where they're going to learn the key concepts, skills, and strategies to catapult their performance in assessments and exams. It's risk-free. They either achieve bigger and better results with a whole lot more confidence in 10 weeks, or we refund you in full. Just head over to www.rocksolidstudy.com/program, and I'll see you there.